I'm interviewing Valentino Patarini for the family oral history. When were you born? What year were you born?
July 27, 1935.
And where were you born?
I was born in St. Luke's Hospital, Chicago, Illinois.
Okay. And there's a kind of a family legend about the announcement of your birth, that when you were born they had to do what to notify your family? I always heard that they had to call the lady across the street.
I have a phone.
Because you didn't have a phone.
Oh,
that's a legend?
That could very well be, because we lived probably next to Jim Formosa's grocery store. Yeah, I would be very surprised if we had a phone. Yeah,
no. I just remember, I thought it was you that told me that. It might have been Auntie Aurora or somebody else.
But I never heard that either.
Yeah, no,
but they had to call the people across the street.
That would have a great deal of credibility, yes.
Okay. Well, that's what we're trying to find the facts here. Nothing but the facts. Now, describe your family, your siblings and your parents, etc.
Okay. 3 older sisters. Lottie, who was 18 years older than me when I was born. Vera, who was 16 years older, and Aurora, who was 14 years older. Let's see, done the math, but I don't remember exactly how old my mother and father were when I was born. What? My mother was 37?
Yeah.
37, well, that would make my father 40...
No, 50.
Almost 50, yeah. So it's not a stretch to suggest that perhaps I was a mistake.
A late arrival.
A late arrival, yeah.
Surprise.
Yes.
Okay. And no, your parents came over from the old country, but not together.
Not together, no. Mom was, if I understand correctly, 3 years old when she came over with her family.
The Compassos. Jenny Compasso.
Compasso. Composso. They came from the Piemonte region of Italy, which is in the north, not too far from Turin. My father was, I believe, 17 when he came over. He came over by himself. There is a unsubstantiated story that his younger brother, Albert, my father had 3 brothers. Okay, Uncle Bob, who was older, probably the oldest, he was in the Italian Army.
Captain Uncle Bob.
Captain Uncle Bob. Another brother, Mauricio, who was in this country when my father got here. And Albert, who I believe came later. I have not been able to substantiate when he came. But the story, the unsubstantiated story, is that my Uncle Albert, who was the younger boy, was studying for the priesthood, and presumably he either was molested or was attempted to be molested by the local priests. As the story goes, my father took offense to this and opened a big can of whoop-ass and poured it all over the priest. So he probably left town with the Cavalieri on his footsteps.
Very rapidly.
Anyway, he embarked.
Probably embarked. But
he embarked. He left the country out of France.
So he went through the mountains.
Through the mountains to France, which kind of lends a little bit of credence to the story.
Geographically, it makes sense.
And came over to this country. Had recently checked the ship's manifest that I got from the Ellis Island website, and it gives a lot of information. And according to the manifest, he was going to be meeting his brother Mauricio. That was presumably the reason he was coming to this country. I had the idea that he came to this country with a job in the coal mines. I don't know whether he actually came here with that job or whether when he got here, because his brother Mauricio was it Pittsburgh area? Is that what it said on the manifest?
I think.
So it's the Pennsylvania area that had a lot of coal mines. So, wow, here's a job. I think I'll be a coal miner. I don't know how long he worked in Pennsylvania, but he then moved to Clinton, Indiana, to work in another coal mine, which is where he met and married my mother.
I didn't know that.
They were married. I don't know how long he worked. He worked in Clinton, but then he moved on to, let's see, Lottie was born in Iowa, so he would have gone to Iowa to work in the coal mines again. From there, he went to Colorado, which was where my sister Vera was born. Then apparently he came back to Clinton, and I don't know whether it was to work the coal mines. I don't know what else he would be doing other than working coal mines.
That was in 21 when Aurora was born.
And that would have been when Aurora was born. And
what brought him to Chicago?
Basically work. At that point, Uncle Albert, his younger brother, was now in this country and had started his family and lived in Chicago, South Side area, referred to as Kensington, or as my mother would refer to it as Bumtown. He had a number of jobs. I have a picture of him. I have heard stories that he worked for a while as a railroad detective. And I have a picture of him on the back of a train, passenger train. I have no idea whether that was a posed picture or what. Anyway, he then went to work for the Pullman Company, building Pullman cars. And about that time, the Depression hit. And being uneducated and a laborer, he was one of the first to be let go and one of the last to be hired. I want to say that the next real long-term job he got was working at the Sherwin-Williams paint factory in Kensington. And he worked there basically as a laborer, moving around pallets with the cases of paint on it. He was the union steward there. And that would be in keeping because he was a union member of the United Mine Workers during his time when he worked in the coal mines. And I have a couple pictures of him with in large groups at conventions where John L. Lewis was in attendance. My mother was basically a homemaker. She stayed home and she raised the children. We eventually, I don't know how old I would have been, fairly young though. Yes, not even in kindergarten yet. We moved to Dobson Avenue in a 4-flat, and the fellow who lived downstairs of us was a cop, and he was the local precinct captain for the Democratic Party. And he got my mother involved in working at the polls on Election Day. And for whatever reason, I guess when my sisters were older, Vera and Aurora were married. They had their own families. Lottie had graduated college and was working. And I was probably in grammar school. And she, presumably through her contacts with the Democratic Party, got a job at Grand Crossing Park, which was right across the street from our house, as a locker room attendant. And since it was right across the street, it was a case, and my sister Aurora lived half a dozen houses down the street. She felt comfortable going to work, and Aurora looked after me somewhat. And I spent most of the time at the park anyway.
Right.
So,
your dad's gone from.
oh, well, yeah.
Your father died when you were...
Okay, yeah, that's...
How old were you when your father passed away?
It was Memorial Day, 1948.
So you would have been 12.
I was 12. I was
Almost
in
13.
seventh grade, going into 8th.
Okay.
And my father and mother always said that my father had bad asthma, that he contracted it while he was working for the Pullman Company. In retrospect, I am convinced that what he had was black lung disease from working in the coal mines.
Could have been asbestos in the Pullman Company too, though. Could have been asbestosis.
It could have been. The only thing I'm saying is that he worked for 20 years, 30 years in the coal mines, as opposed to a couple of years with the Pullman.
Okay.
So it's like I say, it would be difficult to prove now to try to go and get something from the government for black lung, but I'm convinced that was the cause of his death. Anyway, he got quite ill. Local doctor, Dr. Miller, sent him to what was the hospital there off Stony Island Avenue, Jackson Park Hospital. Jackson Park Hospital.
South Shore was the only.
Yeah, which, by the way, did not have a particularly good reputation in the area, but did all the tests and the GI series and everything and could not find anything wrong, sent him home, and not too long after that, he just got very ill, coughing severely, in pain. My mother took him to St. Luke's Clinic, which is what you did then. And they immediately admitted him and did some tests and basically told him that, well, they're going to try, but there's just, at this point, not very much that they can do for him. All of his coughing had apparently shaken some of the internal organs loose, and they were kind of laying on other internal organs, which led to other problems.
Now, how old was he when he passed away? Or how old was he?
He was 62. 62, 63. I'm not sure which, but right in there.
Do you remember his date of birth? Oh, his year of birth?
Yeah,
Ma was 98.
And he was 1889. 89?
Wasn't it reverse number?
I thought that it was, but 93 to 89 would only make 4 years difference.
There was 13 years between them. Mm. Your mother was 4 years older than my mother. My mother was born in 02, which meant your mother was in 88, and 98. And then 13 years,
would have been about like 85. About 85, and if he died in 48...
That would make him 62?
62.
Okay, so yeah.
And
I didn't realize he made it to his 60s. I always had an idea that he died in his early 50s, so I didn't realize he lived that long.
My grandma was 13 years younger, so she was in her 50s, so that's where you might have gotten that.
Right.
So, but anyway...
young when they got married.
Anyway, so he died, and... being the baby, as it were, 12 years old, I knew my father was in the hospital, but, you know, he had been in the hospital before, so, you know, no big deal. And Dom, Aurora's husband, Dom, was watching me that day. And some of my buddies were going to the Museum of Science and Industry. And in those days, there was nothing wrong with a 12-year-old getting on the bus and going to the Museum of Science and Industry or the Chicago Stadium or Soldiers Field, you know. And I asked them, I said, now, so-and-so and so-and-so are going to the Museum of Science and Industry. Can I go with them? And I now realize, you know, that he kind of hesitated, like he didn't know how to handle it.
Right.
And apparently I must have put him in a very difficult situation. He said, well, yeah, okay, go ahead. And so I went, you know, and I came back, and it's interesting. We lived on the front second floor of the fourth flat. And I was walking up the steps, ready to walk upstairs, and there was a group of older guys, 14, 15, 16, 17, you know, that kind of, across the street by the park side. And one of them yelled over me, and they said, "Hey, Junior, did your father die?" And I said, "No." They said, "Oh, you know." So I went upstairs, and everybody's sitting around the living room, and I come in, and I'm excited. I'm telling about everything I saw at the Museum of Science and Industry, and there was a pause, and Aurora is the one who said, "Pa's gone." And, you know, that was it. Seems like Aurora was always the one to call, to pass bad news on to me. When my mother had to go into the nursing home, she's the one who called and told me. When my mother passed away, she's the one who called and told me.
When Lottie was sick.
When Lottie was sick, well, of course, it was only her to tell me then.
Right.
Yeah. Well, no, Ma had passed away by that time. Yeah. Anyway, it's kind of like it's something, the chore that fell upon her.
Right.
So, yeah, basically that's kind of it. Yeah, we lived in Chicago, and
backtracking a little bit, do you have memories of the Depression or World War II? Or was that you were such a young kid, you really don't remember? You didn't know you were poor, sort of a thing, like all the poor people always say?
No, I didn't know I was poor.
We were Depression babies.
Yeah.
Do you know that term?
Yes.
Okay, we were Depression babies. We came late.
Okay, no. I have very little recollection. What I do recall was laying on the couch in the front room with my father during the day. It's okay. Stupid dog. Starting at 3 o'clock with soap operas and listening to the soap operas until supper time. And, you know, that was, I never gave it.
Listening, not watching.
No.
This was radio.
Yeah, and it never occurred to me that, well, gee, why is he here? Why isn't he out working? Because, to my recollection, that was the normal thing. And...
Oh, because he was unemployed.
Because he was unemployed.
Okay. All right. I thought you were referring to his health, but no, he just had no work.
Just had no work.
Gotcha.
Like I say, he was basically uneducated. He was a laborer. He was a coal miner. Italian, yeah, at that point.
But tell the story. I always enjoy it. You and your dad, where you slept, and the oil burner.
Oh, well, no. Well.
On the third floor, second
floor,
a flat.
Second floor flat. It did not have central heat. The front room, the front of the house was the front room, and off the front room was a bedroom where my father and I slept. Beyond that was the dining room, and in the dining room was an oil burner. And then off of that there was a bedroom, and then you came to the kitchen, which had the kitchen stove and that, and then off of that was another bedroom. So actually we were living pretty good. We lived in a 3-bedroom flat. Yeah. And my job in the winter was I would go down the basement, take a 5-gallon can, fill it with fuel oil, and come up and fill the reservoir of the oil burner.
And you were 10 or 11.
10 or 11. Go back downstairs, refill that, and bring it up and have it next to the oil stove so that when the reservoir burned down, you didn't have to go back down to the basement. You just poured more in the middle of the night. And then later on, we got very wealthy, and we got a new kitchen stove that had a garbage burner next to it. So we could burn coal in the garbage burner to heat up the kitchen and the other room.
They actually burned garbage in the kitchen, in the stove.
And in the wintertime, when it got really cold, there were double pocket doors that separated the dining room from the front room. And we'd have to close that off because otherwise you just couldn't heat the house. And then in the evening, Father and I would go in and pile the covers on us and sleep in that front bedroom. And, yeah, okay.
You have no recollection of listening to, like, reports from Pearl Harbor or Iwo Jima your brother-in-law, because Dominic was in the war.
He was in the war.
So were you getting letters and reports from that, or was it kind of
it was
censored from you because they didn't want you to worry about Dominic?
Well, a lot of times, being the youngest, nobody told me anything. And yeah, and the one recollection I do have was when Truman died, and not Truman, Roosevelt died. I do have a recollection of that. And I have a recollection of the E-Day because it was during the school year and we got school off.
That was a big whoop.
Oh, and there were,
picnic parades
around the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
Around the Dobson and Greenwood, the cars and a couple of the local guys who were in the service, who were home on leave.
Yeah.
Of course, now they were the heroes, and that was great. But other than reports of the war and how we were doing, we'd go to the movies, and it'd be the newsreels, and they would have stuff on there about such and such a battle. But none of that ever stuck.
Okay. Now, in high school, you wrestled. That was your sport, basically.
Yeah, yes.
And actually, I guess we say that, I know at least, that you were always one of the shortest kids in your class growing up, but then you shot up in high school, apparently?
Yes. I remember in all of my grammar school pictures, I was one of the few boys sitting down on the floor in the front row.
That's what the shorties did.
That's what the short kids did. And,
by high school, you had caught up.
By high school, I had caught up.
Eileen Sullivan's story.
Well, yeah. There was a girl who was in grammar school with me. Her name was Eileen Sullivan, and she was a big jock. She was a volleyball player, softball player. I mean, she did everything. And because my mother worked in the locker room at the park, and because Lottie was a PE teacher and a big jock in her own right, my mother knew Eileen, and I knew Eileen, and Eileen knew me, and there was this thing here. And in grammar school, Eileen was always, this big jock, and she was always bigger than me, and what have you. And coincidentally, in high school, we got into the same homeroom, the same division. That's what it was called, division, same division. And in senior year, the seniors all met in the auditorium. You sat according to division, but you were all in there. And that way, if they had a senior announcement, they made it to everybody at the same time, because the schools did not have PA systems that went to all the rooms at that point. And I don't know, it was at some point when I was a senior and we were in there, I was kind of standing, by my seat, and Eileen was sitting. Well, she would have been sitting in a row behind me. I always had this vision of her being in front of me. But anyway, a row different. And we're talking about one thing or another, and I haven't even any idea what it was. And it all of a sudden dawned on me that I was looking down at Eileen Sullivan. I was now bigger than Eileen Sullivan.
That was a big deal.
Yeah, this was a big deal. Big deal.
And later, when Dad and I were dating, I worked with Eileen and her sister at MK Car Rental. And you are dating Morris Patarini?
Which was the name I used through grammar school and high school. It was Morris, because my father was Valentino.
Valentine.
Yeah, Valentine. And I was always junior.
Or for the family.
For the family, I was junior. And when they registered me in school, they registered me as Morris, which is the English equivalent of Mauricio.
Now, did you join the Navy while you were still in high school, or after you got out of high school? Did you knock around a few jobs before you joined the Navy, or how did that work?
When I was a senior in high school, one of my good friends, Jack Quirk, was very militaristic. Okay, he was in ROTC. He was an all-city rifle team. He was very militaristic, and I would have to say he probably was the one who instigated it. But he, me, and John Niebuhr. Ron did not. Ron Harder did not join.
Neither didn't.
No. It was just the three of us.
Seemed like there were four, but I can't think of another.
Decided that we were going to join the Navy Reserve. They had a reserve headquarters at the foot of Randolph Street. Downtown. Had a big armory. There alongside, there was the dock, because this was on Lake Michigan. Right on Lake Michigan. And they had a World War II destroyer escort that was stationed there. That was their station. And it was seaworthy. And there was a submarine, World War II submarine, that was also stationed there, although I don't think that one was seaworthy. Anyway, talked to my mother and told her that that's what I wanted to do. And the Korean War was kind of winding down at that point, but we were still in the Korean War. And I think she reluctantly probably signed the papers, because I was 17.
What year did you graduate high school? What's your year of graduation?
Graduated in 53.
53, yeah, I was going to say that would be about the end of the Korean War.
Right, so I went in the reserves in 52, probably in the spring of 52. I have to check my DD 214, but for the exact
That's an
date.
important form for you to remember the name of.
But anyway,
son.
so we went in to the reserves, meetings once a week. In July, would have had to in July of 52, before I graduated. We went and did a 2-week boot camp at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, which is halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. Continued to attend meetings. And then, let me back up a bit. At that point, there was still the draft. And the general consensus was at that point that, you would serve time in the military. If you were a male, healthy male, you were going to serve time in the military. So, which was actually one of the motivations for joining the Navy Reserve, because that meant that I would not be drafted in the Army. When I had to do my service time, it would be in the Navy.
Or whatever you chose.
Yeah, I could always choose to join the Army or join something else, but when it came time, the thing was that if you were in the Navy Reserve and you got your draft notice, report for induction such and such, you went down to the Navy Reserve headquarters, said, here, I've been called into the Army. They then took the action to put you on active duty and put you in the Navy on active duty.
And that was your service.
And that was your service time. Okay. So anyway, at some point, and at this point, I want to blame Nevers. Well, actually, I don't want to blame him. I really want to give him credit. But he decided that, we might as well all put in for active duty, because you could do that from the reserves. Say, okay, I want to go on active duty. And we calculated it, figuring how long a normal boot camp would be. If we went in on a certain time, we would be getting our boot camp leave around Christmas time. And that was great.
And Niebuhr was a finagler.
Yes. John was always someone who had an angle. So, okay, we did that. And it turns out that since we had put in our 2 weeks of boot camp, they just sent us right to a receiving station, and we were both assigned to ships. And I was assigned to the Edisto, which was an icebreaker. He was assigned to the Atka, which was an icebreaker. And we both thought, oh, this is cool, because we'll probably be working together.
Out of Boston.
Yes, out of Boston, both of us. Well, it turns out that when the Atka was out on station, we were in Boston being refitted, and then we would go out and relieve the Atka, and they would come in. And I think the whole 2 years, we were in port at the same time, maybe 2 weeks. But anyway, the important part of this is that I went on active duty October 15th, 1956. When we applied for active duty, the executive officer said to us, well, now, look, you guys are close to getting your second strike. If you want to hold off until you get that second strike, then when you go on active duty, you'll be going in what they call striking for something. You would be working in a department, working to become an engineman, working to become a radio man, working to become a whatever. And we said, no, we've got this figured out. We want to go in now. Well, it turns out that on the end of October 1956, the government declared the Korean War or Korean conflict ended. And anybody who went into service after that time did not get the Korean War GI benefits. So by going in the 15th of October, I qualified for Korean War VA schooling benefits.
And the mortgage, which we never used.
But the bottom line is that I went through my junior year. I'm pretty sure. Through my junior year on the GI Bill.
No. You were on the GI Bill when we were married. And the whole time. Yeah. You got your $115 a month living money until you graduated with a bachelor's.
Well, the thing is, I guess what I did is there were times when I would disapply for the GI Bill. See, I don't need it right now. Well, you were granted a certain number of days of GI Bill eligibility based on your number of days in service. You got a day and a half of GI Bills for every day in service. And you could stop at any time you wanted and just pick it right up from there. The thing was that if you started a semester on the GI Bill,
You have to finish it.
and you ran out of GI Bill, it carried to the end of that semester.
Oh, nice.
So what happened by playing some of these the numbers game, I was able to get a significant amount of coverage under the GI Bill, and I would have to say, and I don't know that this is actually the truth, but the big motivation for my going to school was the fact that I had the GI Bill. So why not? You know, and otherwise,
Your sister and mother wanted you to, but you didn't want to. And then, since this came up, you said, "I'll get them off my back."
Well, no, that didn't have anything to do with it. The big motivation was that in almost 2 years on the deck force, some of the people that I was taking orders from, using the old cliche, did not have enough sense to pour piss out of a boot if it had instructions printed on the heel. And it occurred to me that if I did not get some kind of an education, there was the possibility that I could go through my life working for that kind of person. And I just did not want to take that chance.
So when you got out of the Navy, you started school at Navy Pier and then transferred to University of Illinois?
Yeah,
That was the university.
Well, yeah,
That was a satellite campus.
It was a branch.
It was the Chicago branch of the University of Illinois.
Okay, I never realized that. You just always called it Navy Pier.
Yeah, and that's all it was.
Okay.
Because
Kind of like Lynn went to Avery Point, Yukon. Okay.
right. Well, the thing is that Navy Pier got its name because during the Second World War, the Navy took that over and used it as a training station.
Gotcha.
And it became known as Navy Pier. Then, after the war, the University of Illinois took it over as a 2-year branch. And about the time that I left there to go downstate, they were in the process of establishing what is now called
Permanent campus.
UIC, the University of Illinois at Chicago.
The Circle.
And the Circle campus, and it started out as a 4-year school, and it now gives graduate degrees and everything, and it's a full...
That's where Lester went. Yeah.
UIC?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll take your word for that. So, yeah, okay.
So now, you guys met, and I guess you would have been out of the Navy when you and Mom met?
I was out of the Navy and going to Navy Pier.
Tell them how you ended up, the quickness of getting out of your commitment and getting into college. That was a story in itself.
Another story.
Always a story.
Yeah, always a story.
Going to run out of time on this.
Yeah. When I joined the reserves, I was 17. I went in under what they called a kiddie cruise,
right,
which means that my obligation was finished the day before my 21st birthday. When I went on active duty, because I went in on a kiddie cruise, the day before my 21st birthday was my discharge date. Well, in between that time, Congress passed what they called the Universal Military Training Act, which meant that every male had an 8-year military obligation. From the time they were 18 until the time that they were 26, they could be called to serve. Well, what this did was knock out the kiddie cruise that I was on. This kind of was just totally gone. So a couple of months before my 21st birthday, the Edisto, which is the ship I was on, was going north for a 3-month cruise. 4-month cruise.
To the Arctic.
To the Arctic. There were a number of us who the powers that be decided did not have enough time for it to be worth their while for us to stay with the Edisto and then have to fly us back to be discharged. So I was one of those. So we were transferred to another icebreaker that was in port and was working to be refitted, the Glacier.
And Maine icebreaker.
Yeah, it was Yeah, it was the newer model. Reported aboard there and reported to the First Lieutenant Yeoman who handled all these things. And he said, okay, now in the meantime, I had decided I was going to school. Okay, I had filled out the applications. I think I had, I'm trying to remember. The timing gets a little confusing. I took leave and went home, took some aptitude and interest tests to determine which curriculum I should get into, applied to Navy Pier, was accepted, because in those days, basically all you needed, if you were a resident of Illinois, you had a high school diploma, they had to take you. Everything was set. I come back expecting to get out July 26th. Report to the glaciers, and some of the fellows said, okay, you're due to get out October 15th. I said, oh, whoa, wait a minute. No, I'm on a kiddie cruise. I'm due to get out the 26th of July. He said, sorry, that's not the way anymore. And he explained universal military training. Okay, well, what I had to do was put in a request for early discharge, which, they had, if you had a legitimate reason. And my reason was that I had been accepted to school, and I was planning on starting September 5th or whatever the starting date was that time. And it was granted. I mean, like I said, if you had a legitimate reason, right, hardship, what have you, they were very free in giving those things out. And so I got out and started school. And
so at 21, you started your first year of college?
Yes. I turned 21 in July, and in September I started school.
And until then, not any of his sisters or his mother or him ever had driven a car or had a license. So he was 21, did not have a driver's license, was getting out of the Navy, and he was in Boston and...
Well, I came home on leave and decided I wanted to buy a car. Right? No, what I had been doing was I don't know what the hell I was making, $150 a month. Maybe it's a third-class postmate. I might have been making $200 a month. Whatever I was making, sending half of it home to my mother. She was putting it in the bank for me. So I had like $1,000 in the bank. That was big money. So I went out looking for a car when I went home on leave to take these tests and to register at the University of Illinois and all like that. And went to this lot, and here was a 1950 emerald green Mercury V8. It was primo. Bane of my existence. And I didn't have a driver's license. So I took...
And nobody in the family did.
Jim Bainhart with me when we bought the car.
So he could drive it home.
So he could drive it home.
Jim was his best man.
Jim was our best man when we got there. And to make a long story, I went and got my license and everything. I was planning on taking it back to Boston, drive back to Boston, because I was dating a very nice young lady. Very nice, I can't remember her name. Irish young lady.
In Boston.
In Boston. Who would have figured in Boston? Joni something or other. Anyway, awful nice lady. We had almost as much fun dating as when your mother and I dated. But anyway, I figured, hey, this would be good. This would make dating a little bit easier rather than taking a tea every place we wanted to go. And a couple of days before I was going to leave, my mother said, would you do me a favor? I said, what? Don't kid yourself. Would you please not drive the car back to Boston? And I said, oh, shit. So I said, hey, if it's going to cause her that much anguish, at least Joni and I were used to taking the tea. We would go different places. It's not like I had a car and all of a sudden I didn't have a car. So I said, okay, fine. I'll let the car back in Connecticut. Chicago. Wherever it was.
Where you lived.